Did Andor have flaws? There is a lot of Andor content out there, but I really couldn't find anyone mention the things they didn't like. So that's what I'm here for. Andor seasons each take a very different approach to telling the story of rebellion. Season 1 is more traditional, with a clear central protagonist who pushes the story forward, and the cause and effect of the plot centers on their choices. Season 2 wanted to show the reality of rebellion, a joint and scattered and messy effort of a bunch of people who don't know each other but are all driven by the same beliefs. 2 months later, I'm here to say, in the difficult approach Andor took in writing Rebellion in Season 2, they created some problems for themselves. It had flaws. I'm also here to say I couldn't find any in Season 1. There were what should be flaws, which I'll talk about, but they circumvented them in creative ways where they just weren't flaws. Season 2 was still amazing, don't get me wrong, but it couldn't work around those flaws in the same way. But Season 1, I mean, genuinely just a perfect season of television. So let's start with that. The normal way a character arc about rebelling and doing the right thing and all that would be structured would be to have the first act of this character's arc be creating the motivation and the realization of the need to do the right thing. But that doesn't happen in Andor because they tell the story of rebellion and radicalization by using Cassian as a representation of the oppressed, meaning it wouldn't make sense to give Cass's motivations at the beginning of this story. If he represents the oppressed, there should already be a whole backlog of motivations. And a backlog he has. Andor uses its first arc to let us see how Cassian's home and community were destroyed by the Empire. And then later we learn how his adopted father was also killed by the Empire. But the problem with having your character's arc be about not just accepting things and learning to fight back is before they get there, they are just accepting things and not fighting back. Boring. Cassian does not take a very active role in the story until the prison arc, which is a big part of why I think everyone, including me, loved it so much. That's when he really becomes the star of the show. Before that, though, his goals don't drive the story forward because his goals are essentially survive and don't get caught. Don't get caught is not an active goal, which is the point. Right now, he is passive in this fight. Problem is, that can be boring. To make this work, Cassian needs to be made interesting in other ways. That other way being, he's really good at the things he does. So even though his overall story goal is still passive, don't get caught, it allows him to take an active role in every confrontation he gets into. The cops confront him, but he takes control and disarms and makes a choice to kill them. The ISB is after him, but he shoots his way out and then outsmarts them to escape. The entire Aldani heist is him playing an active role due to his skills and a plan and goal that aren't his. Even in the small things, in the characterization. These two guys confront him for the money he owes them, but he's not worried at all, easily talks himself out, and walks away.
To threaten me? Vetch, you let him talk you into this?
The subject is money.
I just ask you a question.
What?
Since when do you take orders from Nurch?
Don't answer that.
You need work this bad.
Leave him out of it.
He said all I needed to do was stand here.
Good. You keep at it.
You think I'm messing around?
I hope so. I'm gonna do us a favor and not mention this happened.
This is how Andor keeps Cass interesting and a major player in the story while still keeping his inaction, which is part of his arc, intact. The themes behind that arc in the season about fighting back aren't just told through Cassian specifically, though. It's also done through mentor characters and speeches, and I want to talk about this specifically. Andor loves its speeches, which is normally a sign of weak writing. It can be this crutch where the themes are just straight up told to the audience in a way where it's obvious that it's meant for the audience, not the characters, without having to write those themes in a nuanced and subtle way through the story. Andor spams them. Besides the first, each arc is capped with some kind of speech or monologue. The Aldani heist has Nemik's monologue, the prison has Kino's One Way Out, and Ferrix has Marva's Fight the Empire. There's 3 reasons these speeches work. 1, they aren't crutches. The story doesn't rely on them to get the theme across. It uses them to create an emotional release based on all the work the story has already done. The second is they're integral moments to the story. The plot doesn't happen without them. In a story about inspiring rebellion, speeches work to actually inspire people to rebel. Nemik's manifesto is probably the least integral, but it is still the first step in Cassian's change. Kino's and Marva's speech, though, create the escape in the prison and the fighting on Ferrix. They inspire us because they're inspiring the characters. The third is they sound natural and in character. The other big problem with speeches is people don't naturally speak off the top of their head in this elegant soliloquy where they pour their hearts out. So it sounds really weird. Andor doesn't write them that way. Nemix is a written manifesto, so it's allowed to sound the way it is. Kino starts off not knowing what to say, just repeating Cassian's words until the anger and the words with them start flowing. And Marva's is an actual speech at her funeral, but doesn't come off as this cheesy, overridden speech. It sounds like Marva telling her friends to stand up for themselves. Nemik and Marva serve as mentor characters to Cassian, characters who know the truth that he needs to realize and influence that change in him. The really cool thing, though, that I love about the prison arc is that it's where Cassian becomes the mentor character. I don't think Cass has adopted this full rebellion mindset at this point. It's still limited to escaping this prison and then to go back to his passivity. But in becoming the mentor and inspiring change in Kino, and seeing Kino sacrifice fighting for a goal he could never reach, Cassian's passivity dies. It's where he realizes one way out isn't just a literal truth here, it's symbolic of the Empire, and the only way out, the only path to freedom, is by fighting for it, which defines Cassian's final choice at the end of the season. That's essentially Cassian's climax. But season 1 isn't just about him, it's about Ferrix too and how a community learns to fight back. And that's where we get, in my opinion, the best arc of the whole show. It's this amazing culmination of every character arc throughout the season, where every motivation clashes in a way that's exciting while still feeling natural. Cass just wants to see Marva's funeral, and he wants to save Bix. Luthen and Deidre and Cyril are all working against each other, but all for the same goal in finding Cass, all with the backdrop of a setting and a community that, because of the time we got with them, we are invested in as much as we are in each main character. And the thing setting everything off being my personal favorite speech of the show from a character that we got time to care about, who's given this perfect end where even in death she gets to accomplish her goals of inspiring rebellion. Everyone and everything here has given me a reason to care. This is beautiful, beautiful writing, which is where my first criticism of season 2 comes in. I think this show over relied on Rogue One as a climax instead of creating their own. The last 2 episodes feel like this slow decline in setup because it was. And it's hard to overly criticize this because Rogue One does exist and its ending is a great climax for the story, though as a whole it's very eh. But I would have really liked this ending to not hinge so much on the Death Star. The Gorman arc works as a kind of buffer where, yeah, in the background, what this really is about is building the Death Star, the substrate calcite or whatever. But that's not why we're invested in this arc. We care about Gorman. The ultimate question is what's going to happen to Gorman and the people there? The last 3 episodes, though, remove that buffer and it fully relies on the mystery of the Death Star. The ultimate question is now, what is the Death Star and are they going to be able to relay that information to the rebellion? But we already know the answer to that question. Andor really tries to give the Death Star this aura of mystery and fear and awe, but this just doesn't work when we've seen 3 Death Stars now. Even if you've just seen 2 or 1, or just have it seen being destroyed, or have seen it in a million clips, it's just not a mystery anymore. It's been around for, 50 years or something. When you think about any horror movie, the scary parts are the unknown, not knowing what's behind that door. Once we see the monster, that fear dissipates. So the fear of the unknown is just a lot greater than the fear of a giant space ball that shoots lasers that we've seen a million times. If we didn't know all that, I do think they did an amazing job of making this feel scary and like a mystery. This is one of the few cases where I recommend to anyone who hasn't seen any Star Wars to not watch it in the way it was made and instead watch Rogue One before A New Hope. Not because that makes A New Hope better, it might make it worse, I don't know, but because it makes Andor better and I just care about that more. But it's not just the Death Star itself that's the problem. It's the fact that Rogue One, being the de facto climax, means season 2 just doesn't have the same do or die finale that season 1 had. I've been criticizing the last arc, but I want to emphasize it's really just the last 2 episodes I have a problem with. Episode 10 was perfect, not hinging on the Death Star, but hinging on Luthen and Clea and their relationship and climaxing in this perfect way where she does what she needs to do while allowing us to see how she was raised to become the person who's able to do it. It also starts off in what I consider a perfect scene, which isn't just perfect for these character stories, but also a perfect representation of the power of radicalization. Deidre chooses to confront Luthen, not for any gain of the Empire, but to feed her own ego, needing to look him in the eyes and tell him she beat him. She did it. I mean, she comes in pretending to be a customer, brings in that old Imperial Starpath unit, putting on this whole show when she already had the element of surprise, when she already won, just so she can get his reaction. There's no logic in this. This is pure ego. And Denise Go plays this perfectly. There's this smug smile on her face when she tells him you're finished, ready to see him scared and panicked. But she's confronted with a man who has no fear, no regrets at all. And then, without hesitation, he just ends it. Her being again too self centered to ever think of the possibility of somebody caring more about a greater purpose beyond themselves. Her ego driving her to this moment she dreamed of, instead, it being taken away by a man who killed his ego long ago for a purpose beyond himself. This, along with her hypocrisy, breaking the rules she claims are so important, stealing access to information, all ending in her downfall. Diedre's character represents the Empire, a selfish power structure that acts purely for its own gain, while pushing its falsely righteous ideals on everyone else. Her choices also ended in Cyril's death. I think me and a lot of people were getting the feeling that Cyril was going to have some kind of redemption. Instead, he went out in the same way he started off, a tool for the Empire and a nobody to his enemy, willingly blind to the horrors of the Empire because they gave him this false sense of purpose. He fell for the righteous ideals. I also think there's something to be said here about the protagonist-antagonist relationships. Deidre and Luthen reach the end of their stories in what is basically a final battle, where the story isn't just putting two characters against each other, but pitting their ideological differences against each other. The winner is the one who dies, but that doesn't matter. What matters is emphasizing the ideology of selfless purpose over selfish fascism. Luthen reaches his goal, Deidre doesn't. In the same way, Cyril gets his final battle versus Cassian. What's so funny here, though, and really interesting, is that this is just Cyril's final battle. Not as in he's the one who dies, but as in Cass does not care about this. This is not his climax, this is not his battle. His story is not close to over, emphasizing Cyril's flaws. But both these characters have still always been ideological opposites. If Cassian's flaw was an action for a righteous purpose, then Cyril's was relentless action for a wicked purpose that he deluded himself into thinking was righteous. Sounds a little familiar. And that is the real through line of Season 2. Through Deidre and Cyril, the rebellion as a whole becomes the focus instead of one single rebel. Season 1 established Deidre and Cyril, puts them together, and then makes their goals, which is really Krennic's goals, which is really the Empire's goals, push the story forward so that the rebellion across the galaxy can be sort of shuffled through in reaction to what they're doing on Gorman. Andor makes his intentions clear when it starts off with multiple episodes of Cass being stuck with a band of immature rebels showing a side of the rebellion we really haven't seen yet. Willman is in and out, Faye and Finta pop back up and then Finta dies, new characters on Gorman become central. The only real consistency comes from Deidre and Cyril. This also has its problems. I got pretty tired of spending so much time with this band of rebels who were quite literally introduced as just an irrelevant detour in the story, a boring stopgap we need to get through to move back into what actually matters. This would have been fine for an episode, but we spend way too much time here. I thought the wedding arc was great because it was payoff to Mom's entire season 1 story, but it sucks that we just never get to hear anything on how she felt about leaving behind her family forever, a potentially really good way to expand on a common theme of this show, the cost of rebellion. Bix's trauma ending in them blowing up Dr. Gorst felt very abrupt, where I was pretty sure the whole scene that it was just another dream sequence. For a show like Andor, this felt really ungrounded. There was no planning needed, there were no stakes, it was extremely easy, no consequences at all, and it was never even mentioned again. And from what we got to see, it basically just cured Bix. It seemed obvious to me that either they didn't have the time or didn't feel like spending time on Bix's PTSD, so they just found a way to quickly move on. All this shuffling also meant no real time individualizing any of the Gormans, who were personally attached to the central conflict and would have benefited most from the screen time, which is obvious given the fact that I can't name any of them and I just keep calling them the Gormans. It wasn't nothing, we still saw them argue in their different personalities, but compare this to Ferrix. Unlike Ferrix, we get no personalization of these guys outside of the conflict. We don't see any of them undergo any real change. We don't see any of their individual background or motivations. We don't see their lives before this conflict started, meaning their occupation doesn't create that same anger in us that it did in Ferrix. They're given to us as a whole, as the Gormans. And aside from just the screen time, because of Cyril and Deidre being the through line, a large part of the Gorman story is told through the viewpoint of Cyril. Still, the reason this arc works and works really well is because the Gorman massacre served as a sort of de facto do or die moment that the finale is missing, resembling the finale of season 1, where our main players are all in the same conflict, not just literally in Gorman, but also with Mon in the Senate, her speech, and Cass rescuing her. Still, Season 2, in trying to make it about the rebellion across the galaxy, is elevated by never alienating its main characters from Season 1. Cassian is still directly involved in every single arc, and after a season famous for its monologue, starting Season 2 off with Cassian having one of his own, was a perfect way to show his own radicalization. Luthen and Clea become less mysterious to us, and instead we get to see them actively doing their fun sneaky spy stuff, while going deeper in their relationship and getting this perfectly fitting end between them. Mon becomes even more active in the Senate and has direct conflict with Luthen, and we get to create this relationship between her and Cassian, which could have easily just been a one-time rescue and ignored after that. But instead, using their shared, complicated relationship with Luthen and his death, the show makes them feel close in this very real feeling way with this sense of mutual respect between them in the few scenes they get together. Andor also had to find a way to get rid of Bix since she's not in Rogue One, and it could have easily done that by just killing her off, like most shows would do. Instead, by having her, through her own decision, leave Cass so he'd be dedicated to the cause, is this perfectly bittersweet way to demonstrate the themes of sacrificing for a greater purpose beyond yourself, giving her a perfectly fitting end. Deidre and Luthen obviously are expanded on and given perfectly fitting ends. I'm sure you're seeing the theme here. The characters we know and love, whose stories are now over, each and every one gets an ending that fits their character and what their character represents about rebellion or fascism. So yeah, Season 2 wasn't the perfect, flawless story that Season 1 was, for me at least. But it doesn't really matter. I do think most of the flaws here were a symptom of outside restrictions. The fact that this is inherently a prequel to Rogue One, and that they only had 12 episodes to wrap everything up. And to clarify, this was still an amazing season of television. I mostly just wanted to talk about the story in a different light from all the other million Andor videos on YouTube. I'm not some massive Star Wars fan, so this might sound sacrilegious to say, but Andor is the greatest thing to come out of Star Wars, and it's not close at all. There is a massive, massive gap between Andor and whatever is second best. Your choice, it doesn't matter. Through the writing, directing, acting, everything, you can feel the intent and the messages it wants to leave with you. It's not just here to entertain you. Every choice is anti-fascist. Everything about this show is about the grand change normal people can create when they simply believe they can. There is intent in not making you just see that message, but feel it. That's all I got. Go rewatch Andor. Thanks for watching.